Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I apologise for my absence, but I was feeling poorly last week. Let me start with some macro thoughts. By the end of the year, consensus is split between 50 basis points lower than here, or 75 basis points. And essentially, this concept that the US is going to cut rates very, very dramatically has taken hold in the markets. This week the Fed meets and the probability of a 25 basis point cut is around 72%. 15th of July, I wrote an article saying a US rate cut in 3 weeks is a racing certainty. And on the 24th of June, I was writing about what we witnessed, this lurch into negative rate territory, and I called it a Wizard of Oz world. Home thoughts, meet Tim of the Amboseli. He turns 50 this year and is one of the biggest tuskers alive in the world today. The photos are by Ryan Wilkie. I went back to watch a program called The Empty Quarter in 1967 by Wilfred Thesiger, the legendary desert explorer crossing the Rub al-Khali. And I read all his books in the Thesiger library, and he said many things. I had learnt the satisfaction which comes from hardship and the pleasure which derives from abstinence, the contentment of a full belly, the richness of meat, the taste of clean water, the ecstasy of surrender when the craving of sleep becomes a torment, the warmth of a fire in the chill of dawn. In the desert, I'd found a freedom unattainable in civilization, a life unhampered by possessions, since everything that was not a necessity was an encumbrance. And finally, the harder the life, the finer the person. The New Yorker had a very interesting photo booth inside a vanished hub of Beijing's experimental art scene. And Salman Rushdie's written a lovely short story, Don Quichotte, in the New Yorker. And this is an extremely successful pharmaceutical tycoon, and his wife is telling him, so many wings they have, she said. Metropolitan Museum wing, named after them, Louvre wing, also London Royal Academy wing, also a bird with so many wings, can fly so high. But we are not birds, we have no need of wings. At the Tate Modern, they have a staircase with their name. At the Jewish Museum in Berlin, they have an escalator. They have a rose, also pink, bearing their name. They have an asteroid in the sky. So many things they have. Why must I care about asteroids and escalators? She knew what to say. Branding, she cried. You buy naming rights, your name becomes loved. It will be so loved, and love is good for business, no? So good. He loved his wife. Okay, he said, smile wings, smile extensions, smile gallery, smile balcony, smile wards, smile elevator, smile toilet, smile star in the sky. She broke into song. When you're smiling, she sang, it was their song. When you're smiling, the whole world smiles with you, he said. Political reflections, China's deploying its J-20 stealth fighter to keep tabs on Taiwan. The People's Liberation Army Air Force posted a photo on its social media account this week showing the 5th generation fighter tagged with the number 62001, designating the aircraft as part of a frontline unit. The stealth fighter had entered the Eastern Theater Command, which encompasses Taiwan. The unit turned operational in Eastern Theater Command is precisely aimed at Taiwan, Ko said, and to challenge US military activities in the Taiwan Strait, posing a threat to the median line that Taiwan's Air Force patrols along. In the Asia Times, as long as Tsai remains in power, Trump is in the White House and anti-China protesters agitate on the streets of Hong Kong the potential for a US-China conflict over Taiwan's future status will dangerously endure. I've written about how the tinderbox is the periphery. Events of the last few weeks suggest the CCP has come to the end of its patience, both with Hong Kong and Taiwan. It's a very fluid situation, and don't forget that joint operation between Russia and China, which intruded into the Cadiz, the Korean airspace, and the Japanese. Boris Johnson has vowed no-deal Brexit by any means necessary, war cabinet of 6 to deliver Johnson's mission. He set up a war cabinet in a dramatic shift. Michael Gove, the minister responsible for no-deal preparations, said the government was working on the assumption that Brussels would not strike a fresh agreement. In a Whitehall revolution, Johnson will make every decision on Brexit policy with a team of just 6 senior ministers, all of them Brexiteers who support no deal. Putting the country on a war footing, Johnson has ordered Gove to chair meetings of civil servants and political advisors every day, including Sundays, until the 2016 referendum result is delivered. Hedge funds have ramped up their bearish pound bets. This is from Holger. We're last at 123.34. And looking as if we're headed lower, the pound has sunk to the lowest level against the dollar since April 2017. Let's go to the currency markets. Euro dollar 111.20, dollar index 98.037, Japanese yen 108.65, Swiss franc 0.9928, the pound 123.34, the Australian dollar 0.6907, India rupee 68.87, South Korean won 1183.81, the Rial 377.77, Egyptian pound, one of the most stable currencies in the world, 16.5955, the Rand has softened up 14.28. Dollar index, this is a chart, I'm expecting further dollar strength, especially if the Fed limits itself to a 25 basis point cut and a more hawkish statement than the market might be ready for. Euro dollar last at 111.20. I still think we're going below 110 now on this move lower. And dollar yen, which is ground higher, it's last at 108.66. But we're now in a very interesting place on the chart. We either move dramatically higher or dramatically lower. It's a wedge formation. Commodity markets, gold, 14, 18, just everybody is long. That's my concern. Crude oil, $56.05. The Bank of Korea has released its yearly estimate of North Korea's economic trends for last year. The estimate gives a contraction of the economy of 4.1%. Shrank in 2018 for a second straight year, and by the most in 21 years, hit by international sanctions to stop its nuclear program and by severe drought. Contracted 4.1% last year after a 3.5% fall in 2017. So that indicates that the sanction warfare has been actually more severe than you might be led to believe, from Trump in particular. North Korea's international trade fell 48.4% in value in 2018. Mining sector shrank 17.8%. Population estimated at 25.13 million. Income per head $1,298. I've written severally about it, and in April 2018 I was referencing something that Kim wrote. He said, "A new history starts now, an age of peace from the starting point of history." The events that took place on Friday at the truce village of Panmunjom and during the Inter-Korean Summit were breathtaking for their Hollywood optics. The opening shot of Kim Jong-un surrounded by a phalanx of North Korean officials, later replayed as Chairman Kim sat in his presidential vehicle surrounded by his ninja bodyguards, was almost as good as the opening sequence in P.T. Anderson's Boogie Nights. This was cinema of the highest level, which is no surprise when you consider that Kim Jong-il, the father, was obsessed with cinema and amassed arguably the world's largest personal film collection, over 20,000 bootleg 35mm screening copies. Kim Jong-il also had a penchant for Hennessy parody cognac, and for 2 years in the mid-1990s he was the world's largest buyer of Hennessy parody cognac, importing up to $800,000 of the stuff a year. Kim Jong-il began his career as the head of the state's propaganda and agitation department, and it's clear that Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, holds the same role and evidently handles all the optics as a chip off the old block. Friday was tip-top geopolitical optics. Pompeo, the newly minted US Secretary of State, that was in 2018, had visited Pyongyang the previous week and pronounced that the young North Korean leader was a smart guy who's doing his homework. The footage to which I was referencing is on Rich Wrap-Up, if you want to watch it, being escorted with his jogging bodyguards. In November 2010, I wrote of far away in distant lands lies the Hermit Kingdom. They've all had tiny little hands like the elves and the shoemaker. And this country has nuclear weapons, and on its border with its neighbor South Korea sits 25,000 American soldiers. And I said, I believe that North Korea is the perfect attack instrument in a way for China. September 2017, I wrote of screaming comes across the sky. He was letting off rockets then. A curve each of them feels unmistakably. It is the parabola. They must have guessed once or twice, guessed and refused to believe that everything always collectively had been moving toward that purified shape latent in the sky, that shape of no surprise, no second chance, no return. February 2018, I said he's the buffer state between China and more than, by then, 30,000 US soldiers parked on their doorstep. And I was sort of predicting that South Korea was set to be peeled off. Going by his puppy dog smiles, President Moon River will be in Pyongyang before you can pronounce Kim Yo-jong correctly. Russia always had their back. China was never interested in bringing him to heel. He is the buffer state. Let's move on to Sub-Saharan Africa. This is my piece over the weekend. The IMF released their iconic World Economic Outlook last week and said the following about Sub-Saharan Africa. In Sub-Saharan Africa, growth is expected at 3.4% in 2019 and 3.6% in 2020, 0.1 percentage point lower for both years than in the April World Economic Outlook, as strong growth in many non-resource intensive countries partially offsets the lackluster performance of the region's largest economies. Higher, albeit volatile, oil prices have supported the outlook for Angola, Nigeria, and other oil exporting countries in the region. But growth in South Africa is expected at a more subdued pace than in 2019, than projected in the April WEO, following a very weak first quarter, reflecting a larger than anticipated impact of strike activity and energy supply issues in mining and weak agricultural production. So after downshifting SSA growth 0.1% for 2019 and 2020, they have pegged Nigeria at 2.3% and 2.6%, and South Africa at plus 0.71% and plus 1.1%. Nigeria and South Africa constitute 50% of sub-Saharan African GDP, and I think Nigeria will post lower numbers than projected by the IMF. And worthy of note is that both economies are in fact in reverse because of population growth, which is exceeding GDP. This single paragraph does not tell the story because this year in 2019, so much has gone on. Let's start with the geopolitical and political dimension. There's been a significant advance and intrusion by middle powers. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt was always there, into the Horn of Africa. The Oud Spring in Khartoum met a red in tooth and claw counter-revolution. And Sudan feels like an African fault line. It's somewhat counterintuitive, but it is the Al-Sisi model which is delivering economic growth of 6%. But I, for one, think it's impossible to replicate because the cry for political freedom is relentless and at fever pitch. Sudan is surely a collision which is set to be repeated elsewhere in what could morph into a Gladwell-level move, not unlike Ebola, which is exponential at its heart. America feels detached. China certainly more cautious around its BRI loan book. Russia has reasserted itself with its unique bag of tricks, elections, weapons and cash, particularly where there are resources available for swapping. The United Kingdom will surely seek a bigger engagement post-Brexit, and France and the future of the French-speaking world is also in Africa. Quite a sophisticated policy toolkit is required. India is a player too. At a more granular level, Zimbabwe is a laboratory experiment with inflation last clocking 176%. There is a straw and camel's back moment, but predicting that moment is always a fool's errand. Centrifugal forces are working against the mercurial Prime Minister Abiy's agenda in Ethiopia. The French-speaking countries like Côte d'Ivoire and Senegal are in a sweet spot, in large part precisely because of the stability of the euro anchor, and at which very moment they are considering dumping the connection and launching their own eco. President Tshisekedi in the DR Congo continues to build momentum from a low base. East Africa's infrastructure model, predominantly rail, is finding that the main creditor is not being persuaded to pony up more cash. The actual signal was emitted at FOCAC 2018, but policymakers' antennae were scrambled then, and the message did not get through. The message got through at the third time of asking, in fact. The proof of Magafulinomics will be in the eating, and surely we will know whether the cake it is baking is a growing one or a shrinking one. The overarching, and interestingly at a time when the rest of the world seems to be embarked on a process of fragmentation and globalization coming apart at the seams, Africa is proudly moving counter-trend with the African Continental Free Trade Area. Of course, the devil is in the details of the execution, and such things can simply fall apart in a deluge of non-tariff barriers. But it is a silver bullet, particularly if we allow the free circulation of our people, who are natural entrepreneurs. Just look outside, there are markets just about everywhere. From an economic perspective, balance sheets are fully loaded and the exposure to foreign markets quite high. The SSA Eurobond market is in excess of $104 billion, for example. Just on Friday, Fitch revised its outlook on South Africa to negative, but affirmed BB+. This is surely a precursor for what has to be a deteriorating ratings trend line across the continent. For now, with the developed world embarked on their own version of voodoo economics, with interest rates deep in negative territory, this has created a benign backdrop for sub-Saharan African sovereign paper because of the optics of handsomely positive interest rates in a world of negative interest rates. However, the ratings trend line versus yield compression means at some point the elastic band will snap. Zambia, of course, snapped earlier in the year. The best performing stock market has been South Africa, where the gold price move higher popped gold and miners' shares. Air traffic between China and Africa has jumped 630% in the last decade. While Cape Town is South Africa's top tourist attraction, few of its 1.7 million foreign visitors venture beyond the iconic areas around Table Mountain to the Cape Flats, a mishmash of sandy, windswept neighborhoods filled with low-rise apartment blocks and shacks designed by the apartheid regime to keep the city's black and mixed-race residents out of view. Police estimated in 2013 there are 100,000 gang members in the city of 4 million. Just 12 miles from Cape Town's beaches, five-star hotels, internationally lauded restaurants, gangs fight for turf in the area's rapidly expanding drug trade. The conflict has led to 900 murders in 2019, more than the annual total for 2018. They sent in the army at some point. Fitch has revised its outlook on South Africa to negative, but affirmed BB+, marked widening in the budget deficit as a result of lower GDP growth and increased spending, including state-owned enterprise support. Debt to GDP they've increased and heightening the difficulty of stabilizing debt to GDP over the medium term. Have a read, that's on Rich wrap-ups. South African all shares up 9.17% year to date. Dollar Rand, I said it sort of topped out around 1380, we're now at 14.2794. Egyptian pound 16.594, EGX 30 up 3.25% year to date. Nigerian all share down 11.17% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange down 6.57% year to date. Tanzania's economic growth slowed to 6.6% year on year in the first quarter of 2019 from 7.5% in the same period a year earlier. CIC Insurance reported its half-year earnings per share declined 95.238%. Gross written premiums was up 6.8%. Investment and other income stable, down 1.042%. Claims and policyholders' benefits expense was up 7.946%. Profit before tax down 77.18%. EPS 1 cent versus 21 cents last time. They say the profit before tax declined from 644 million to 147 million, mainly because of the loss in our life business occasioned by the adverse group life claims that are not expected to repeat. Kenya shilling, when I last checked, was at 103.90. It's depreciated 1.9% year to date in comparison to a 1.3% appreciation in 2018. Diaspora remittances continue to improve, were last at 2.8 billion through June 2019, up 13.6%. Yields on 10 and 30-year Eurobonds dropped to fresh record lows. Have a look at this chart from Saiton. And similarly, the yields on the 7 and 12-year bond dropped to 6.1 and 7%, and that's a function of what I previously described. Interbank was just at 2.4%, but look at the volume traded on the interbank. This is just a tier 1 market now. The volume was 8.2 billion shillings, which is neither here nor there. Nairobi all shares up 6.1% year to date, trading at a PE ratio of 11.6, and the NSE 20 is down 6.42% year to date. Thank you.